Human rights violations are among the most devastating injustices that affect individuals and entire communities. They rob people of their dignity and freedoms, often leaving scars that last a lifetime. Here are 15 major types of human rights violations that have had profound impacts on the world. Genocide. Genocide is one of the most heinous crimes against humanity, where entire groups, defined by their nationality, ethnicity, race, or religion, are deliberately targeted for destruction. This can include mass killings, forced displacement, and acts designed to wipe out entire populations. The Holocaust, the Rwandan genocide, and the Armenian genocide are some of the most tragic examples. Genocides have long-lasting effects, and the global community continues to search for ways to prevent such atrocities and bring perpetrators to justice. 2. Torture. Torture involves the infliction of severe pain or suffering, either physically or psychologically, to punish, intimidate, or extract information from individuals. Despite being universally condemned, torture remains an ongoing violation in many conflict zones and under oppressive regimes. It leaves deep scars on survivors, physically, mentally, and emotionally, and often affects entire communities. Efforts to eradicate torture focus on holding accountable those who commit these acts and providing justice and healing for the victims. 3. Slavery and human trafficking. Though it is illegal in most parts of the world, slavery still exists today, often in the form of human trafficking. Victims are forced into labor, sexual exploitation, or even sold for organs, deprived of their freedom and autonomy. Human trafficking primarily affects vulnerable women, children, and marginalized communities. Modern slavery has taken on horrific forms, but international organizations, governments, and activists continue to fight for survivors and work to dismantle these networks. 4. Discrimination and racial inequality. Discrimination happens when people are treated unfairly based on their race, ethnicity, religion, sexual orientation, or disability. It permeates systems of education, employment, healthcare, and law enforcement. Racial inequality, in particular, causes significant disparities, with marginalized racial groups often facing poorer outcomes in every aspect of life. The fight against racial discrimination is ongoing, with civil rights movements across the globe calling for equality, justice, and a society where all people, regardless of their background, are treated with fairness and respect. 5. Gender-based violence. Gender-based violence, GBV, is violence directed at an individual based on their gender, with women and girls being disproportionately affected. It includes physical violence, sexual assault, harassment, and harmful practices like female genital mutilation and trafficking. GBV isn't just a personal issue, it's a societal one. It is rooted in inequality and power imbalances that need to be addressed through advocacy, legal reforms, and education. The fight against GBV is growing as more attention is given to empowering survivors and dismantling the systems that perpetuate this violence. 6. Child labor. Child labor is the exploitation of children through work that deprives them of their childhood, education, and potential. This violation is most prevalent in industries such as agriculture, mining, and manufacturing, where children are often forced to work in hazardous conditions for long hours. While many countries have laws prohibiting child labor, it continues to affect millions, particularly in developing regions. Efforts to eradicate child labor involve strengthening international laws, improving education access, and offering support to vulnerable communities to prevent children from being coerced into work. 7. Forced migration and displacement. Forced migration and displacement occur when individuals or entire communities are compelled to leave their homes due to violence, conflict, natural disasters, or persecution. Refugees and internally displaced persons often face severe challenges: lack of shelter, food, medical care, and safety. These individuals are vulnerable to exploitation, abuse, and human trafficking. The international community strives to provide support through humanitarian aid, advocacy for the rights of displaced persons, and long-term solutions for resettlement and reintegration. 8. Denial of freedom of speech. The denial of freedom of speech is a violation that silences individuals, restricting their ability to express opinions, critique authority, or speak out against injustice. It is a core human right, vital for democratic societies, as it allows people to voice their concerns, advocate for change, and hold governments accountable. Countries that suppress free speech often do so through censorship, intimidation, and imprisonment of journalists, activists, and political dissidents. The fight for free speech remains a central issue for human rights activists who demand legal protections and freedom for those who dare to speak truth to power. 9. Religious persecution. Religious persecution occurs when individuals or groups are targeted because of their religious beliefs. It may involve violent attacks, social exclusion, legal restrictions, or forced conversion. Religious minorities in certain regions are particularly vulnerable to persecution, where laws or social norms marginalize them or treat their beliefs as inferior. International organizations, including the United Nations, advocate for religious freedom and work toward creating safe environments where individuals can freely practice their faith without fear of oppression. 10. Political repression. Political repression. Political repression is the suppression of political opposition, dissent, and activism by government authorities. It often manifests as the imprisonment of political dissidents, harassment of activists, restriction of protests, and manipulation of the electoral process. Political repression can be a tool for governments to maintain control, stifling democratic participation and human rights. Advocates for democracy and human rights continually call for reforms to ensure that individuals are free to voice their political views without fear of retribution. 11. Violation of LGBTQ+ rights. The violation of LGBTQ's rights involves discriminating against individuals based on their sexual orientation or gender identity. This can range from legal inequalities, such as the denial of marriage rights or adoption, to violence, harassment, and exclusion from social or professional settings. LGBTQ+ individuals often face persecution in many parts of the world, with some countries enforcing laws that criminalize same-sex relationships or transgender identities. Advocacy for LGBTQ+ rights focuses on promoting legal protections, societal acceptance, and the elimination of hate crimes and discrimination. 12. Arbitrary detention. Arbitrary detention refers to the unlawful imprisonment of individuals without due process, often by government authorities. Those detained may not be informed of the charges against them, or they may be imprisoned without trial, often based on their political views, ethnicity, or religion. Arbitrary detention is a grave violation of human rights, as it denies individuals their basic freedoms and the right to a fair trial. Efforts to combat arbitrary detention include demanding accountability from governments, legal reforms, and international pressure to protect individuals from unjust imprisonment. 13. Extrajudicial killings. Extrajudicial killings occur when individuals are murdered without trial, typically by government officials, military forces, or paramilitary groups. These killings bypass the legal process and often target political dissidents, activists, or marginalized groups. Extrajudicial executions represent a severe violation of the right to life and the principle of legal due process. Human rights organizations advocate for investigations into these killings, accountability for perpetrators, and the reinforcement of legal systems that ensure justice is served through due process. 14. Lack of access to education. The lack of access to education is a violation of the fundamental right to learn and develop one's full potential. When individuals, especially children, are denied access to education, they are deprived of opportunities for personal growth, better employment prospects, and the ability to participate fully in society. This is particularly severe in regions affected by poverty, conflict, or discrimination. Efforts to combat this violation include improving educational infrastructure, removing financial or social barriers to education, and promoting policies that ensure universal access to quality education for all children. 15. Denial of right to health care. Denial of the right to health care occurs when individuals or groups are deprived of access to essential medical services, often due to their socioeconomic status, geographical location, or government policies. This violation is most severe in low-income and developing countries, where lack of infrastructure and insufficient resources prevent many from receiving basic health care. The right to health care is central to human dignity and survival, and its denial can lead to preventable deaths and suffering. Advocates for human rights work to ensure that everyone, regardless of background, has access to affordable and quality health services. These human rights violations, though varied in form, are deeply intertwined with issues of inequality, injustice, and power. Fighting for the rights of the most vulnerable and demanding accountability for these abuses is a collective responsibility. As we continue to learn from the past and advocate for those who suffer today, we move closer to a world where every individual can live with dignity and freedom.